Is there anybody who's planning on serving next year?
I'm all done this year.
So am I.
So am I.
And there's a bunch of new people. Well, if we want to give it a little bit of time, I'm not planning, unless I get hit by a truck, not planning on missing any meetings. So
I'll
Sophie,
Well, then I
for vice
accept
chair.
hers. Let's accept hers.
John, that's a motion. I'll
Yes.
second it.
Second,
Second.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Oh, all in favor?
Yes, here, yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you, Sophie.
My pleasure. I
So
said that now, I may regret it.
Yeah. As long as it's not last year, you're good. That was the fun year. Audra, do you have something you want to start with, or do you want me to start with introductions and?
Yeah, I think it'd be great if you want to start with introductions and some of
Okay,
the
process.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So everybody, thank you for attending. Special thanks to those who came back after last year. That was a fun year, fraught with a lot of unusual circumstances. With the COVID pandemic was just starting, and we in the middle of it, and there were so many unknowns. I think we're in a lot better place this year than we were last time. And to those of you who are new here, tonight is an introductory evening of learning about what the Budget Committee does, how we work, and what the budget process is. So I'd like if we could start with introductions and go around the room, as we call it, and just people, I don't know if you see everybody in the same, why don't I call off names and we can do a roll call that way. And if you can just say where you live and how long you've been in Camden, that would be great. Ava Baeza, are you here? No, Ava. Jill Delano? Another no. Sarah, Scrivenich?
Yeah.
Scrivenich, I got it right the first time.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Scrivenich. And we'll do a double introduction because people, Andy and I we live right on Turnpike Drive in Camden, so just down from Beveridge Farm. And we have been 5 years in Camden. We've lived here 8, but 5 settled in Camden in this house. So
Great, thank you. Lisa Price? Lisa, you need to unmute Lisa. Lisa.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, I'm Leisha Price, and I live on Washington Street, and I've been in Camden for 8 years.
Great. Andy, we I guess just got 2 for 1 with you, unless you have something to add to that. Nancy Harmon Jenkins, or Andy, did you have something to add?
No.
No. Okay. Was Nancy here tonight or not going to be here tonight?
He's not going to make it tonight.
She was not making it tonight. Peter Lindquist, I know you're here. You'd like to unmute?
Hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Peter Lindquist, 36 Chestnut Street. Recently moved from the Millville neighborhood to Chestnut Street just a couple of years ago, but 15 years in Camden. So look forward to helping.
Great, thank you. Skip Hoblin.
Been here 6 years. I live up on Barnestown Road above the Snow Bowl, and best move I ever made.
John French. John?
I'm here.
There you go.
Yes. 23 Garden Street, been here forever.
John, you're hard to hear
How's that?
again. How many years? You broke up, John. No, we had problems with your audio.
50, 40, 50.
Yeah, a lot.
I don't know, 61. I get 61. Well, I don't know what to do about it.
Okay, good. Well, I think we'll get it. We'll see what happens as we go on. Lisa,
Lloyd, I'm here.
I think last time, John, did you go on with the telephone for your audio and video with your computer? Did we try that at one point? I think we had that with one member anyway. Might want to try that if it continues to be a problem. Lisa Dresser.
Yeah, I live up on the north end of town, about a mile beyond the state park. I've lived here in Camden for 5 years, but have been involved in the community for probably 10 between West Bay Rotary and my work at Paws Animal Adoption Center and as a realtor at First New England Real Estate and now Kate's Real Estate in Rockland.
Great, thank you. Jim Hurd. You're on mute, Jim. There, I think I can unmute you. You're unmuted now.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Great, thank you. I moved here in 1983 and I raised 4 children here. I live on Harrison Avenue, just down the street from Pamela Gleason and right behind Richard Householder.
Neighborhood.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Wendy. Hi,
Shelley,
Pamela.
Shelley
Hi.
Butler, I think I saw you here.
Hey, Robin. I live on Hardin Ave and I've been here for 5 years.
Great. Drew Lyman. Did I see Drew on there? I thought I saw him. No, Drew's not here. Lorna Cummings.
Hi, I live on 40 Pearl Street. I was on the committee last year and I've lived in Camden. Well, it's going to be my 30th anniversary, so 31 years.
Wow. Richard Householder, are you here?
Yes, I live on Park Street and I've been here 26 years, serving 14 years on the planning board.
Great, thank you. Mary Winchell.
Yes, hi. I live on Sherman's Point Road and this is my 12th year in Camden.
Great. Wendy Rich.
Hi, I live on Pearl Street. We've been here 25 years.
Wow, a lot of people have been here a long time. That's great. Sophie Romana.
Hi, I live on Chestnut Hill and this is my 4th year in Camden.
Courtney Sukforth.
Hi, I'm Courtney. I live on Glenfield Circle and I have been in Maine permanently since 11, but on and off since I was 5 years old up until 11. So pretty much my whole life, unfortunately.
Beth Stone.
Hi, I live at 2 Thomas Street and I've been here since 2010. But I also spent, well, before that, I lived in Lincolnville for many, many, many years. And I actually worked for the town for 21 years before I retired in 2015.
Great, thank you. And Tyler Smith.
I live on C Street in Camden, and I was born and grew up in Camden. And so I spent my first 20 years here, but for these past 3 years, I've lived in Camden.
Great, thank you. And last, I'm Robin McIntosh. I live on Mechanic Street and I've been here on and off, but always called Camden home since 1976, however many years that makes. And it's been a while. So.
And Robin, you passed over Pam Gleason.
Excuse me?
You passed over Pam Gleason, I think.
Hi, Robin.
Oh,
Pamela.
sorry.
That's
I'm sorry.
okay. That's okay.
Oh, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd love to. Yes. I'm Pamela Gleason. I live on Harrison Avenue, just down the road from Jim. And I've been living in Camden for 10 years, but coming here since probably about the mid 80s to visit good friends of mine. So love this town. I'm so happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Pam. Actually, I didn't see you on the list. That's why I retyped up the list and I was looking for you, seeing as we talked about joining the budget committee before you decided to join. I thought, where is she?
Well,
Anyway,
I'm
I must have missed
I'm
it.
on my list, but
You're here. Okay, good.
Yeah,
You're
I'm
here. Thank you. Good. So thank you, everybody. That's a good group of people. I just wanted to go through a few specifics of the meeting. As you can see, it's a Zoom meeting. It's actually a Zoom webinar. So we are here as a panel. There are people in an audience that are not showing on the screen, but this simplifies what we're looking at is just staff members and panel members here. The select board, as you know, is always here in our meetings to listen and hear what's going on and understand the discussions that we have so they can reference that when they go through their deliberations of the budget process later. So they are in the audience as well and available for questions or comments as we go forward. So, and then staff members that are here are Audra, the town manager, Jody Hanson, finance director. Is Marlene here? Marlene Libby? No.
He's in the background.
She's in the background. Okay. Janice S&C, who everybody knows, is assistant town manager. And then department head, staff, and other people from the community who present will come in and out as we need them and just be on the screen rather than everybody all being on the screen at the same time. So then the videos are being taped and they're also being shown live on the computer. So everybody will stream live so people can be watching what we're doing. Again, select board is here. They're available to answer questions and clarifications. Bob may have a word for us. Bob Falciani, our select board chair, may have a word for us to just talk about what the select board is doing and their take on it when we get started. A few Zoom pointers. I don't know if everybody is up to date on Zoom. You can adjust the way you view. I like to see a gallery view. I think with a webinar, yeah, you can do it up in the upper right-hand corner. If you put your cursor up there, there are different ways that you can view the screen, but a gallery view shows you everybody all at the same time unless there's something being shared. You also may want to keep the chat box open over on the right-hand side because people can ask questions and make comments, and that'll be monitored during the course of the meeting as well. To help everybody, you see, it looks like everybody's got their real name on their screen, which is great. Sometimes you see iPad or something like that, but it looks like everybody's on that. Audio, if you think you were going to be having background noises, if you can stay on mute unless you have something to say or questions, and please feel free to unmute and ask those questions, but it just keeps some of that background noise at bay. You know, it all sounds super formal, but it flows once we get going. And for the audience, anybody who's watching from the outside, they can either put questions into the chat box, so it'll be monitored, as I said, or if they know something's coming up in advance, they can submit questions to Audra and to town staff to bring to the meetings. General process, the members are expected to review the items that are on the agenda in advance of the meeting. Town manager will do a brief introduction for each department or budget segment. And in most cases, then a department head will come in and give a presentation of their portion of the budget. There's plenty of time for questions and comments from the committee, and we do want to remain aware so we're not here super late every night. Audra, Jody, and the department heads and select board members are all available for answering questions as we move forward. The meeting itself will follow Robert's Rules of Orders, and a quick reminder regarding those rules. For a quorum, we have 22 people on the committee, so we need 12 people for a quorum, which we have this evening, so we can take votes as we go for, actually there aren't any votes. Well, we did that one vote, but other than that, there aren't any votes in the budget actually this evening, but for future, we'll need 12 members in attendance. And actions to take an action for a vote. There must be a motion made by a member of the committee, seconded by another member. The motion will then be up for discussion and a vote taken. The vote passes if the majority of the committee votes in favor, and voting will be done verbally on a roll call basis. Amending a motion prior to a vote. If somebody puts forth a motion, it's seconded, but then during the discussion that we want to amend that, you can actually make a motion to amend the first motion and we will vote on that. And then if it passes, vote on the amended motion. If it doesn't pass, go back to the original motion. We can table votes. Votes can be tabled if there's something that we feel we need more information at a later point or we want to wait for something in sequence. We can also move to table a vote until a later date. In reconsidering formerly passed motions, we have, in the past, there have been times where towards the end of the process, you start to realize that maybe something that happened in the beginning, you want to reconsider because of things that we're finding out later. We can go back and revisit a vote from earlier. We hope we don't do very many things. But we can ask to reconsider a motion. We cannot do that multiple times. We can only go back and do that once. So reconsidering a motion is great if we can leave that until the end. We can revisit a third time. At that point, it has to be somebody who was on the winning side of the first reconsideration, and then it needs a 2/3 vote to pass. If we get there, we can revisit those rules. Again, we don't want to do that too often. And then at the end of the process, when we get to the end of the budget, at the end of the month, we'll have time for questions and be able to look at the budget as a whole. And Jody and Audra and anybody else that is participating from the town can look at what the motions that we've done, what the impact has been going forward. So I think that's it. It's a lot of little rules, but they all kind of move smoothly as we get going. So anything else to add on that, Audra? And otherwise, it's all yours.
Great. All right. I am just going to share my screen to do presentation for you.
And if anybody has any questions about any of that, feel free to ask.
All right. Okay, so we have gone through all the welcome and introductions as well as the rules of order. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about roles and responsibilities of the budget committee. So as you can probably see from the way the budget is set up, there's a column that has my proposed budget, the town manager's proposed budget, and a column that has the budget committee's recommended budget, and then the select boards. So, based on the input that I'm giving you and that the department heads give you, your job is to come up with a recommended budget that then goes to the select board. And the select board, they have sort of the final say on which budget is presented to voters for approval at town meeting. And there's a lot of, variation around that, how that can work, but I don't think I spelled that out last year. So I just wanted to kind of put that out from the very beginning, that that's the process. And that's why you see the 3 different columns there. So as a budget committee member, and we talked about some of this at the beginning, you have a lot of material to get through, and there's, a lot of things I think that are going to be new for some people who are doing this for the first time. So, if you're kind of finding yourself before a meeting with a lot of questions or a lot of things that you don't understand or you're wondering about or you need more background information on, please feel free to reach out to myself, Jody, or Janice, and we will do everything that we can to answer your questions and help you feel as prepared as possible. Also, I feel like the more years I do this, the more I take for granted the fact that, there are some terms or acronyms or phrases that, people like myself and Jody might use every day, but they're new to all of you. And so please call us out if we're using jargon that isn't something that's part of your normal everyday vocabulary. If you don't understand what it is we're talking about, you're almost certainly not the only person, on the committee who feels the same way. So, if I say something like a TIF or a word like that, please feel free to stop me at any point. Just say, can you please explain that? I'm more than happy to. So those are kind of the big ones for now. So I guess on to, what a budget is. It's really the most fundamental policy, overarching policy that we set as a community on a yearly basis. So it's really kind of the starting point for determining, what services the community wants in Camden and to what extent they'll be provided and the different ways that we're going to fund them. This, it's the same for projects or, pieces of equipment. So the budget's really important because it affects every citizen in our community, and it really is kind of setting the tone for what we want to do for the year ahead. So there's a lot of different pieces of information that the budget conveys. So of course, everybody knows it's an accounting document. So it's how people like Jody are able to sort of, record and control our expenses and find out where we're tracking for the year. It's also a management document in that it's saying who has authority to spend money on which items. And it's really important for decision making as well, because even though it's sort of a construct where it's our best guess at this point in time during the year, still, once it's approved, it really is something that we can use as a benchmark for decision making throughout the entire year, with the understanding that things can change as the year progresses. And it's also a communication document. So it's really important for informing the public of how taxpayer money is being spent. So you have a really important role as budget committee, and I really want to take the time to thank all of you for volunteering to do this. You know, it's difficult to get budget committee members, but I really appreciate the fact that all of you have agreed to set aside time, because, you know, having so many community members that understand not just the budget, but sort of how the budget impacts the way that our town operates on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really important for getting that engagement that's really important when you have a town meeting form of government where, you know, the voters are the legislative body that make all the important decisions on what's going to happen in the municipality. So, you know, thank you for engaging as part of this process. It's just going to make you better and our community better at sort of working together to make those sort of decisions. So there's a lot of importance that you have as a community as a budget committee that's beyond just looking at the numbers and approving them or changing them or offering comment on them. You give us really, really valuable feedback on levels of service, projects that you think are important, and policies and other initiatives that as community members, you would like to see the town move forward, or maybe you have input on things that you would like us to do less of. So that's one of the really valuable things that we get out of conversations with the budget committee. So some of the broader conversations that we have over the course of discussing the budget around desired levels of service or you know, issues that you see it's really just as, I can't emphasize this enough, it's just as important as the conversations we have around the actual numbers that are in the budget. And I think a really good example of this is, and sometimes, you know, feedback that we get in discussing one financial year, maybe we're not able to implement that feedback in that particular financial year, but we can sort of come back around a year later and say, okay, well, we got this was really important to the budget committee when we were talking about the FY21 budget, but we weren't able to make those changes in that year for a host of reasons. But now in FY22, we're going to take that feedback on board and try to do something about it. And I think one example of that is there was a really good discussion on fire services during the FY21 budget review process. And so we tried to take that feedback on board when we were preparing the FY22 budget in terms of fire services, and, you know, inform what it was we were proposing based on that conversation from the previous year. So even if something that we're talking about this year doesn't make it in the budget, it doesn't mean we weren't listening and we don't see the value in what it is that you're saying. So some basics on how our budget is set up. So we have a line item budget. It's very common for local governments. And you know, a lot of you, I'm sure, have worked in organizations that use line item budgets. So it's really good at connecting and reporting information on the different areas that make up all of the services that a municipality delivers by, you know, kind of grouping them into like services. So it's great for oversight and control. However, it isn't incredibly flexible. So not a great deal of ability to move money around. There is some, I'm not saying there isn't some flexibility, but, you know, there's other types of budgets where that is arguably easier to do. So this is what it looks like. This is just sort of a snapshot of the fire department's budget from last year, or the proposed budget from last year. So, you know, in it, you'll see, you know, the wages and benefits, as well as, you know, all the other sort of kind of day-to-day expenses that are important for the department to run. So that's kind of like the line item budget for a specific department. So the sections of a budget. So the first thing that you'll come across when you're reading your budget book is the budget message that I prepared. And that can be a really good starting point, because what I try to do is give you an overview of some of the broader goals and objectives for the town, both in the upcoming year as well as ones that might be a little more long-standing and how we're trying to make progress towards those. But I also try to give an overview of any notable changes throughout my budget message. So, you know, if you're new to this and you haven't done it before, that could be a really good place to start, because it kind of will give you a signal of things to look at or things that are different between FY22 and the current financial year we're in, which is FY21. The summary spreadsheet, and that basically just gives you sort of an overview of expenditures by category, and then factors in, you know, revenues to give you an idea of what the net budget is for this financial year, the proposed net budget for this financial year. Then there's a revenue sheet, and in your budget books, I believe it's the green sheet of paper. So we'll refer back to the revenues throughout the budget discussion. We'll do an overview of them in totality, but you know, there are different departments or different services that bring in revenues. So, you know, when we're talking about that particular department, we'll also refer to, you know, revenues that it brings in if it is one of those that has them. Well, you know, the general fund, so that's really, you know, all of the department budgets that you'll be reviewing. The debt service, that describes any debt that the town of Camden has taken on for projects and equipment. And I'll talk about that more in detail, but that's anything to do with debt or sort of capital improvements and reserves. When it's appropriate, I'll refer to them throughout the entire budget process, because there will be, you know, either debt or reserve funds or capital projects that might have an impact on a specific department, or the request is coming from a specific department. So, you know, an example in this year's budget, there's a proposal to purchase a new fire truck. So that particular capital expense is in the capital program, but I'm also proposing to use a portion of reserve funds to fund the purchase of that fire truck. So then we'll go and look at the reserve funds, as well as, you know, funding it with debt service. So, you know, we'll talk about those things as they're relevant to each department. And I'll go into a little detail on the special revenue funds that we have. We have two of them, the Snow Bowl and the wastewater department. So the budget committee doesn't provide a formal recommendation on either of the special revenue funds. But we do ask that you review them and provide comments. So it is important for you to have an overview of them and understand what they do. So like I said, the budget message, that's the narrative. And I really recommend that, you know, you sort of read that as a starting point. So net commitment, like I said, that's got all the high level information on each cost center, as well as, you know, it'll give you a look at, you know, the revenues and the overall expenditures and revenues and what that means for the net budget. So that's pretty much the same thing with the summary. Oh, sorry, with the commitment, I'll get into this in a little more detail as to, you know, the county taxes, schools, and the overall sort of impact on the tax rate. So another important point about the revenues on the green sheet, these show all the projected non-property tax-based revenues that we're expecting in the upcoming fiscal year. So it doesn't go into any detail about property taxes. So you'll see things like the vehicle excise tax, any fees for services that we collect as a town. So things like, you know, building permits, you know, parking, we used to get a little bit of revenue from, you know, parking enforcement, animal control fees. Harbor revenue is also included in there. So if there's a department with any sort of fee for service charges, you'll find that in the revenue section. tax increment, the use of tax increment financing, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit, as well as the use of surplus. That'll all show up in the revenue section of the budget. So like we were saying with the general fund, I gave you an example of the fire department's budget. So that's sort of the day-to-day operations of the town. So you'll look at each budget associated with each department. So capital improvements. So this is the section of the budget where any major purchases and projects are planned and budgeted for. And it's typically things with a value of over $10,000. It's, there are some expenses that are around the $10,000 mark that do get absorbed in sort of the general fund or the department's general operating budgets. But, usually for large purchases, we keep them in the capital improvement program. So, examples, a new plow truck, if we're planning on building a new facility, or if we're planning on some, major upgrade to infrastructure, like we're going to rebuild a road, that would all sit in the capital improvement program. So capital reserves. So this is where we set aside funds for future use for a specific purpose. And there's a number of reasons why we would do this. So, we would do this maybe if we wanted to save up in the future for a, planned major project or purchase of a piece of equipment. So, an example, we have a reserve fund for the Washington Street sidewalk improvements. So that's a project that was partially grant funded. And then we had to come up with a 20% match for that project. So, we did that through creating a reserve fund, and we've put money in it over the years. It could also be, a reserve fund could be created for funding incremental improvements. And a good example of this is like our storm drain reserve. So we build that up over time. And if we have an opportunity where there's, like a project that we want to do, we've got that reserve funding available. So it's good to have it for that purpose. And also, emergency purposes, there are some reserve funds we've created, like the winter maintenance reserve. So that's just, for unforeseens that we know that at some point we'll have to have money available for. So debt service, and I'll talk about this in a lot more detail with all of you, but for the majority of major capital projects, like if we're going to build something new, like a new building, or we're going to completely rebuild a road, or any major project, we tend to fund them through debt. And the philosophy behind this is that it allows the infrastructure and equipment to be funded throughout their life cycle, with the benefit to be spread out amongst the taxpayers who are actually benefiting from that infrastructure equipment. So if you have a road and its lifespan is 30 years, instead of putting the burden of paying for that road on, your current taxpayers who might not be here in 15 years' time to enjoy the benefit of that road, you're spreading it out over its entire life cycle, so that everybody who receives the benefit of using that road is paying for it through their taxes. So when you're looking at debt service in the budget, it's split out between the principal and then the interest on any loans, bonds, or other debt that we have. So when you look at the debt schedule, you'll see, things like the demolition of the tannery that was done back in 2008. You'll see the debt for the public safety building. A recent project, we acquired all of our streetlights from CMP and then converted them over to LEDs. And that was funded through a loan, as well as, equipment like a public works dump truck, which is a big, expensive piece of equipment that we wouldn't want to pay for all in one year. And so one of the, the more important things that we'll talk about is trying to sort of balance the impact on taxpayers, because, of course, we don't want to borrow too much in one year and then have such, high debt service payments that it's really sort of, impacting, sort of the bottom line on taxes. So what we try to do is we have a capital plan, a 10-year capital plan that we put in place so that we're able to, stage when we're going to do a project and take into consideration when is existing debt falling off, so that, we can borrow to do something different. All right, so special revenue funds. So like I said before, we have two of them, wastewater and the snow bowl. And they operate a little bit differently than the general fund. So these, as special revenue funds, these departments have to bring in revenue that either meets or exceeds their expenses. So through the wastewater department, it's the user rates of all the users that are on the wastewater system. And through the snow bowl, it's through a variety of different, it's, season pass sales, day ticket sales, events at the snow bowl, like toboggan nationals. And there are a number of other, smaller sources of funding that come into the snow bowl. But the idea with both of these special revenue funds is that they need to be bringing in revenue that meets or exceeds their expenses. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes there is a little bit of subsidy from the general fund, but for the most part, that's how those two departments function. And as a committee, you'll be reviewing both of those budgets. And even though you're not making a formal recommendation, you're still providing feedback and comments to the select board. And like I said before, that's often just as valuable, if not more so, than any formal recommendation on a number. So some frequently used terms that you might hear that I sort of take for granted that not everybody is using them every day. So we'll talk about TIF districts, or tax increment financing district. And really, these are sort of defined geographic areas in a municipality, and Camden has two of them, where new property taxes, which are generated by, usually development. It could be a specific development project, or, it could be development over time. But any new property taxes that are generated from the date that that district is created are set aside, and they can be used to finance either public or private projects for a specific period of time. And those projects have to be defined ahead of time. So, for example, we've got two districts, the downtown district and the highway TIF district. So with both of them, we have development programs where it's kind of very specifically listed out what we can spend any funds that are generated by that district on. So with the downtown TIF district, we're looking at, it's not exact because it determines on the value of that district and how it's either grown or decreased within that given year. But with the downtown TIF district, we're currently generating around $140,000 a year. And so this money has been set aside to fund specific projects. So a good example, we've got matching funds that we've set aside through the downtown TIF for that MDOT pedestrian improvement project. When the decorative streetlights in the downtown were replaced, TIF funds were used for that. There's an ongoing lease purchase agreement for the Knox Mill and Knowlton Street parking lots, and that lease purchase is funded with the downtown TIF funds because those parking lots are servicing the downtown district. And recently there was some money set aside to create a better walkway in the alley that's sort of between the Cappy's building and that leads down to the harbor. So TIF funds were used to, or they're going to be used to make those improvements. We also have the highway TIF district, and that currently doesn't generate any revenue at all. So another term that we'll talk about throughout the budget process is surplus or unassigned fund balance. So Camden currently has about 4.1 million in our surplus or unassigned fund balance. So it's best practice for a municipality to have enough cash on hand to sustain our operations for approximately 2 months. And we don't consider the county or the school as part of that because they both carry their own reserve funds. So if you're to look at this benchmark, Camden, we have about, we would need about 2 million to run our operations for 2 months. So we've got a healthy unassigned fund balance or surplus. So another Another thing that I'll say frequently throughout the budget process is I'll refer to debt that's retiring or retiring debt. And really that's just when we've paid off a bond, loan, or lease for financing a project or a piece of equipment. So we're going to retire a little bit of debt in FY23. There's significantly more debt retiring in FY25 and 27. So for those reasons, I'm not proposing a lot of, aggressive capital spending in this upcoming year. I think that, and I said the same thing in FY21, because it's better, I think, to prepare for those coming years when we're going to have some debt retiring and have some projects that are, really well fleshed out and ready to go. So for that reason, there won't be a lot of capital improvement projects that we'll be considering for FY22. All right, so the impact on taxes, I think, is something that every budget committee is right to have in the back of their minds when they're going through the budget review process. But I think it's important to have a little context around what that means and how that's calculated. So to get the tax rate or the mill rate, it's really just a calculation where you're looking at what is the total valuation of real estate and personal property for the town, and that's you divide the total appropriation that needs to be raised to fund the functioning of the schools, Camden's assessment from the county, as well as all the stuff that we're going to talk about during the budget process. So last year we were looking at, about 1.3 billion in our total valuation, and the total amount to be raised through property taxes between the school, the county, and the town was about 20 million. And so once you do that calculation, that's where you come up with the $15.03 per $1,000 of value. And so that's how you get the tax rate. And so to provide even more context on that, this is sort of the distribution. So when a tax bill goes out, about 63% is the school. So that's last year was about 12.5 million. 30% is the municipality. So that's, everything that we're going to be talking about as part of the budget discussion fits in that 30%. And then the 7% remaining is what the town of Camden pays to Knox County. So about 70% of your tax bill and the tax bill in general is the school and the county. So what we're talking about over the next few weeks will be that 30% that accounts for all municipal spending. So just to give you an idea of what that will mean when you're going through your deliberations, if we're talking about, reducing the mill rate by a cent, we would have to cut spending by about $13,300 or increase revenues by the same. And you can see as you go down through. So, to reduce the tax rate by $1, so to drop from 1503 to 1403, we'd have to cut spending by about 1.3 million. And to give you an idea of that, that would be about the same as the whole public works department, as well as any money for any maintenance on streets and sidewalks and parking lots. So it's it's really difficult to move that needle. And if you're talking big cuts, there's big, huge reductions in services and programs that come with it. All right, so before I get into, going into sort of the broad overview of FY21 and 22, did anybody have any questions? Here, I'll stop sharing for a bit just so everybody can see each other. Mary, are you talking? Sorry, you're muted.
There we go. Okay. I just have a question on the TIF. That seems to be a real mystery to me. So is that unaffected by the fact that there are vacant storefronts? Is this like new property taxes? So it doesn't have anything to do with what's already there?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. So the TIF would be like, we picked up a lot of value when there was a revaluation across the town. And if, say, there were a new building built in the downtown district, all the new property tax revenue from that new building would be included. But yeah, things like, vacant storefronts, it would take a while for something like that to decrease the value of the TIF. Like if there were a building that were vacant over a series of years, and because of that, it had an impact on the assessment, that would make a difference. But yeah, it would be for that kind of thing, it would take time.
Okay, thank you.
Robin,
Yeah.
I'm trying my phone to see if that works
Oh, yeah.
better.
Yep, we can hear you.
Audra, what's the estimated assessment increase this year?
Oh, you mean like on property taxes?
Yeah, well, on value.
Oh, we don't know at this point. I think it's not until April 1st will Carrie have any sort of idea as to what it's going to look like. But I mean, everybody does know what the real estate market was doing this year. So I don't want to speculate, but I can speculate that we haven't lost any value.
I would say we probably gained around 20 million at least.
There was a lot of activity in the real estate market over the past year.
And I guess I gotta say this as a comment. Something you said earlier about the responsibilities of the budget committee and their review of the budget. On a typical year, the budget committee's recommendation goes to the town meeting as what the budget committee represents. And then the select board puts their own through. So that is an important position for the budget committee to take on anything.
Yes.
So,
Shelley, did you have a question? Okay. My cursor turned into a little hand and I thought you'd raised your hand. Sorry.
I think Sophie might have. Did you, Sophie?
But John French read my mind. Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? Or here's a question for all of you, especially the ones who've been on the committee for a few years now. Was there any jargon that you heard from me or anyone else when you first started that you really would have liked me to have explained to you before that maybe we can get out of the way now with the new people?
Cola?
Oh, yes. Yep. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's another one. A COLA. We talked about COLAs a lot last year. So COLA is an acronym for a cost of living adjustment.
Audra, is this a place to talk about revenue sharing to understand how that works, or would you rather do that later when how that impacts the budget?
I'm happy to do it now, and then we can talk about it again when we get to it, just as a an update for everyone. So revenue sharing is the state identifies a certain percentage of sales tax that they reimburse. I'll say reimburse because it's all generated within municipalities, that they share with us or reimburse us for. And that goes into sort of the revenue side of things. And it's always kind of it's sort of a mystery. It's like with the state, it's a best guess at any point in time. Given the uncertainties around last year, and also, the propensity of the state legislature to change that percentage that they're agreeing to share with municipalities based on how well they're doing financially. We budgeted really pessimistically for revenue sharing. So I think that we budgeted like 250,000 in revenue sharing, and we are pretty pleasantly surprised. I think that we are pretty close to 350,000. So we've exceeded what we budgeted for last year by about $100,000. And I think the state legislature is committed to sharing a greater percentage of revenue in FY22 than in FY21. So I think that they were at 3.75% the last time I had an update from Maine Municipal Association.
And one other quick thing. There was a lot of conversation last year as we were going into the pandemic. There was so much unknown in knowing what the town was going to be bringing in for revenues, for tax, for everything, what was going to come in. And you and I talked about this the other day, just to kind of let people, bring them up to speed on where it appears that we are this year, because there was just this great fear. We got halfway through the budget process when everything looked like it was crashing and we didn't know what the income was going to be and what was going to happen to the town, and kind of left it in your lap to fix as things happen. So just sort of give us a state of the town where we are now with that.
Certainly. So I've got a slide kind of coming up on that, but were there any other, yeah, Sophie?
I know the stimulus bill has not been approved yet, but do you hear anything from state of any monies that could be flowing through Camden for the recovery? And I know it's impossible to say when, given that it's not been voted on yet, but is this something we should keep, or you're keeping, I'm sure, abreast, but anything you can say about this?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything more than what all of you have. I know that throughout the year, Jody and I have been providing information to Maine Municipal Association to advocate on our behalf for, stimulus funding. So, we are keeping in touch with them to kind of talk about, what the impact is, and, where we were, where COVID-19 has sort of cost us more money on, certain things, and where we've lost revenue. And, I'll go into kind of where we're at right now a little bit more pretty soon, but, I haven't heard anything. I mean, I haven't really heard anything very promising lately about that moving at all. I'm kind of planning the year ahead, like we've received everything that we're going to get in terms of help from the state or the feds. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I think it's always better for us to be conservative when it comes to that.
I have a quick question. And again, it's all, this is, looking at this is newer from, in this role, the reserves and does this group touch it all? Where the funding and the reserves are held, if it's invested and what gets drawn down, is that part of following the market? Is that come into play with how we talk about things in this budget, or I just didn't know if that's part of that?
So lucky for all of you and for me as well, all of the any money that we have invested in the market is only trust funds. And that sits for the most part outside of your work as the budget committee. And that's another good point, because that did come up too. So we will talk about reserve funds, but none of those are, reserves that are invested at all. They sit in our bank account. But we will go over the reserve funds. So I think it's one thing that isn't in your budget book that Jody and I will provide to you, is sort of an overview of all of our reserve accounts and their current balances, so that you can get an idea of, what we have and why I'm proposing to fund certain reserves and not fund others. Another area that this committee won't talk about, but it's good for you to be aware of it, is we have a bunch of special revenue funds, or restricted funds, not special revenue funds. So there are certain departments that rely pretty heavily on restricted funds as part of their operations. And the Opera House is a really good example of that. So things like the Community Arts Fund, where we have, donations that come in from the community to fund certain programs. So at the Opera House, the Community Arts Fund that we get through donations helps fund the cost of putting on shows at the Opera House. And a lot of those types and grants. Also, if we get a grant for a project, they go into, a restricted account. And those all sit outside of the general fund budget and what you'll all be looking at. So they're there. It's a very important part of, what Jody does and her job, but it's not something you'll be reviewing. And for the most part, we do receive quite a bit of money in grants for, a number of different projects that we do, but we never bring that grant funding into the general fund budget. So even though that it exists and it's happening, it's not part of the budget review process, and it sits outside of what you'll be looking at. And I know it's very different to people who are in the not-for-profit world. And also, if you work with grants and you're from a for-profit organization, because I came from a not-for-profit before I worked for municipalities, and I know grants you would always see that revenue in a budget, but it's very different with a municipal budget. So did anything else, or do you want to move on to the 21-22 overview? All right. So I'll start sharing my screen again. Oh, sorry. All right. So for FY, to get an idea of, sort of the impacts of COVID-19 on the town of Camden, I just kind of wanted to go through some of the, I think the revenue piece was the tricky piece for the budget committee in FY21 when we were trying to kind of figure out what the impact of COVID might be. So I really want to kind of focus on the revenues to give you an idea of where we're all at this point in time. So in terms of our revenue collections, by many measures, we're actually doing better than FY20. So, property tax collection at this point in time, we're tracking exactly the same as FY20. Our vehicle excise tax collection at this point in time, we're up 10% in the year. Boat excise tax, we're up 5%. A lot of our administrative fees are also up from this point in time in FY20. There's been just a tremendous amount of work done and sort of like the code office and the fees that they collect through things like building, electrical, plumbing, all of those fees. We did lose rental in certain areas. So the Opera House, we typically rely on about around $50,000 a year in rental income. And of course we didn't get any rental income, or very, very limited rental income, I should say, this year. Harbor fees generally were really good in terms of collecting for, the transient dockage and all of the, sort of mooring and inner harbor floats and finger floats. All of that was up or around what we would normally expect in the year, but it was things like the day sailors and the windjammer businesses that operate off the public landing, where there was a choice made to reduce their fees because of the financial impact of COVID-19 on those particular businesses. We also, receive a little bit of revenue in rentals out at the Snow Bowl, and of course that didn't happen this summer to the extent that it usually does. We were able to sort of offset some of the expenses that nobody would have anticipated for things like, building plexiglass shields all over the place, and, all the cleaning that we did of public bathrooms, renting more porta potties, all that kind of stuff. We were able to offset those expenses with a grant that we received from the state that was CARES Act funding. So that was the Keep Me Healthy grant funding. So I think, that's kind of the summary of what the impacts were to Camden. We were really quite fortunate. A lot of, towns in southern Maine along the coast and us and some of the mid-coast towns, we were quite fortunate that, the town proper, and I recognize the fact that there are, of course, individuals in our community that were, negatively impacted by the pandemic. But, from a financial perspective, the town proper actually weathered it quite well. So I guess going into FY22, some of the things that I think are important to highlight, there are some payroll increases. So there's a 3% cost of living adjustment for the police department, which is negotiated as part of their union contract. So we're on the third year of a 3-year contract. But apart from the police department, we're not proposing an across-the-board cost of living adjustment for all other town staff. We are at the second year of a 3-year plan for altering our step and grade plan. And the step and grade plan is basically the wage scale for all town employees. And we talked about this a little bit last year, where we've kind of identified that across the departments, we've got a combination of, some departments just aren't able to compete with private sector jobs, even accounting for the fact that a lot of, we're able to offer better benefits than a lot of those private sector jobs. However, even with that really good benefits package, sometimes we're just not competitive. And that was particularly true in like the public works department, wastewater department. So this year we're focusing on the fire department, parks and rec, along with a few administrative positions that have just changed over time, and the job descriptions needed to change to reflect what those jobs are actually doing, as opposed to an out-of-date job description from a decade ago. So the next thing, there's a few reserve funds that have been depleted that we really need to rebuild. So the Opera House building reserve is the most acute example of this. So when we started doing some of the repairs to the gutters on that building, and I believe that was funded with FY19 as part of the FY20 budget. When we started doing those repairs over the summer, we found that the masonry on particularly the facade, but some of the other areas around the building were in much poorer condition than we were aware of. So the select board made the decision to go ahead and make those repairs to the masonry. And a lot of that was because the contractor that we were working with that was doing the masonry work as part of the project to replace the gutters, they agreed to give us a really good price on the facade repairs. So as a result of that, we completely depleted that reserve fund, and we need to build it back up this financial FY22. Our employee benefits reserve has also been depleted a bit, and the IT reserve. So employee benefits reserve, a lot of that can come from, people retiring and paying them out for vacation leave that they've accrued, that sort of thing. And, we really just want to fund it to a level where we're comfortable that if we have, any planned retirements in the upcoming year, we're covering that cost. And then the IT reserve, the IT budget, both the operational budget and that reserve account really took a hit this year. There was a lot that we had to do in a short period of time to sort of get everybody to a point where they could work remotely. And also there were, licenses that we didn't anticipate buying for things like Zoom to be able to just function in our normal, sort of municipal day-to-day work. So the IT reserve has been quite depleted. Also, on the revenue side of things, we're going to utilize less surplus this year than we did last year, or in the current financial year we're in, FY21. So it just shows an overall decrease in revenue, which has a bottom line impact. Another thing to sort of consider going into FY22, we're likely to continue experiencing some of the impacts of COVID on certain non-tax-based revenues. So I think that, the Opera House, maybe not the harbor to the same extent, but definitely the Opera House and Snowbowl rentals. I'm not saying it has a huge impact, but it's just something to be aware of. So some of the kind of good things to be looking at in FY22. So like I said before, we're not seeking a cost of living adjustment for all town employees. And that was really, going into it with the understanding that, there are people who are struggling in the community this year. So whatever we can do to sort of, minimize the tax impact and start out the budget process on a good foot. Everybody was very willing to be sensitive to that. Also, health insurance, the increases for this year are incredibly minimal. So our insurance provider, we receive Anthem through the Maine Municipal Employee Health Trust, and the health trust sets the rates for the year. And so from January of this year to January of next year, there's a 0% increase, a premium increase. So that was very, very helpful for us in, preparing this year's budget. Even though we're gonna utilize less surplus in FY22, or I'm proposing that we utilize less of the surplus, we still do have, healthy surplus that we can use for things that we've committed ourselves to. And one example of that, I don't know if any of you went to the town meeting at the Snow Bowl on January 26th, but at that special town meeting, the citizens approved energy efficiency upgrades to all of the town buildings. And they also approved using $200,000 from surplus. And the idea behind that was that the surplus would offset the tax impact of that first year of debt service payments on the energy efficiency upgrades. So that's good. Going into the budget cycle, we had those commitments and we're able to have them be something that is tax neutral for this financial year. Also, we're going to continue to utilize the downtown tax increment financing revenue for projects in the downtown district. So, an example of that, and this has become an ongoing expense, but, something that's, good to point out is the lease purchase agreement for the Knox Mill and Knowlton Street parking lots. So the cost of doing that is offset with the use of TIF funds. And, any other sort of that's really the only kind of major project that we have going on in the TIF district for this year, but it's still 60,000 or 65,000 a year is a pretty considerable expense. Also, I'm going to propose to use specific reserve funds to help fund capital projects. So even though we're not doing many of them, the harbor, the replacement of floats in the harbor is something we're putting money towards every year, because by, I believe it's FY23, we need to replace all the floats in the harbor so that they no longer have unencapsulated polystyrene on them. So we've been picking it away at that year after year, and we're going to do it again this year. So we're going to replace $50,000 worth of floats down at the public landing and offset the cost of that by using money from the harbor reserve account. And in general, like I said before, we're only going to do the very bare minimum in terms of capital projects. So much like last year, we're going to continue a lot of the planning and engineering work so that we're prepared for like FY25 and FY27 when we have a lot of debt that's retiring or falling off. And this just sort of gives you the broad level overview of the different, the different categories of expenses and how they sort of contribute to the overall municipal budget. So, general government, we'll go through all these different cost centers, but that's things like, the administration and finance departments, the planning, codes, assessing, and all the opera house related expenses. Public safety, that's pretty self-explanatory. So police, fire, what we pay the county for dispatch, what we pay for emergency medical services, and things like streetlights and hydrants. Highways, streets, and bridges, that's the Public Works Department, as well as all the operational expenses that go into sort of maintaining our road and street network, as well as, our parking lots and our street tree program. Health and welfare, so that's money that we contribute to some provider agencies and community services agencies. And the reason that that number is so incredibly low is that there are a lot of organizations that ask for assistance from the town that we're actually able to help with the use of our trust funds. And that kind of goes back to your question, Sarah, earlier about the impact of the stock market. The trust funds are really the only money that the town of Camden has any responsibility over that sits in the market. And we have different committees. We have a trust fund advisory committee that sort of oversees the trust funds and kind of looks at how they're doing in any one given year. And they can make recommendations to another committee, which is the sorry, I said that incorrectly. The investment committee is the one who looks at the trust funds and they can make recommendations to like the trust fund committee, who are the ones who determine the provider agencies that receive that trust fund assistance. So that's kind of how those two work together. And that's why general funds towards provider agencies is so low when you're looking at the overall budget. And then the leisure services area of the budget. So that's where the public library sits, the harbor, our parks and recreation department, as well as the maintenance funds for our dams and the upkeep with all of that. And then debt capital contingency, that's everything that we talked about with, the debt service for projects that we've already paid for, as well as our capital reserves and our, capital improvement program, as well as the contingency. And we'll talk about that at the very end of the budget process, but that's just, funds that we've allocated for unforeseens that came up. And the budget committee made the decision last year to add quite a bit extra in contingency just because of the unknowns that we were all kind of facing when that budget was being finalized in March. All right, so this sort of just goes through some of the more notable, expense increases between FY21 and FY22. So if you look across the board, sorry, I think that number's wrong. I believe it was 31,500, not 18,200. But that's, across the entire organization. Minimal wage and benefit increases if you, sort of look broadly at, what it is they cost us versus what the increase is going to be. IT, that's an area where I'm proposing a fairly significant increase, and that's a combination of licensing for new software, as well as purchasing new hardware. We've got a number of systems that need to be replaced in the upcoming year. And like I said before, that's kind of an area where we had a lot of, we need to do a lot of catch up pretty quickly. The fire department, there's fairly significant increase in that department. A lot of it has to do with the pay reclassification for firefighters, but there are some increases to equipment and other small department expenses. EMS is another area where there's a increase. That we talked about this last year. That was sort of the first year of trying to put in place a first responder program for the town. And this would be, building on that to, additional wages for call first responders, and also purchasing some equipment to enable them to respond to those calls. So recreation, there's a significant increase in the summer program contract cost. That's going to be adjusted as we start to talk about the recreation budget, because at the time that we were preparing the budget, we were still kind of negotiating this with the Y, who we contract with to provide the summer rec program at the Snow Bowl. So they've had to kind of change the way that they've done things due to COVID. And so there was some back and forth around, because there's different ways that the town works with the Y and the school district to try to reduce those costs and share those costs. So, there's been talk about doing it a different way this year. So when we get to the point where we're talking about the recreation budget, I might have some different numbers than what I've proposed in my budget, but we'll go into more detail about that later on. Parks Department, there's been a $12,600 increase. A lot of that has to do with, payroll, as well as a desire for increases to equipment maintenance and grounds maintenance. The debt service, so we did have a little bit of debt that came off this year, but this is going to be the first year of the debt service payment on the energy efficiency improvements to the town buildings. So all in all, it's a $147,000 increase. Capital reserves, they're increasing by over $100,000, and that mostly has to do with replenishing the depleted accounts that I was talking to you about before. And so when it comes to revenue, we're projecting a $100,000 increase in revenue sharing. And really this is, I'm just proposing what we received in revenue sharing for FY21. So we budgeted last year in FY21, 250,000, but we've received 350,000. And I'm confident that we'll receive at least that much this financial year. So that's why I'm proposing that increase. Licenses, permits, and fees. We budgeted very conservatively in FY21 because of COVID and uncertainties around that. However, we're finding that we're collecting similar to the levels of FY20. So what we've proposed is more on par with FY20. And the use of reserve funds, I'm proposing, increasing the amount that we're using from reserve funds. And a lot of that can be attributed to the purchase of a new fire truck. We sold a fire truck to the town of Hope this past financial year. So all of the proceeds from that sale, I'm proposing we put towards the purchase of the new truck, as well as funding it with funding the balance with debt service. But those are sort of the notable expenditure and revenue changes between FY21 and 22. All right, so before I move on into the third part of my spiel for the night, does anybody have any questions on FY22? No. So I guess we'll wait till we're in the middle of it. All right, so the last kind of presentation that I like to do to the budget committee every year is just to talk about employee wages and benefits, because this really, it sits outside of the purview of the budget committee, but you'll see it time and time again as we go through, the department budget. So I think it's good for all of you to, just have the general overview of how it all works and what we do and why we do it. Sorry, it always takes a bit of time for it to move forward. All right, so the decision-making authority around employee benefits, it's really kind of split between the personnel policy, which we have a personnel board that advises on, and then it ultimately goes to the select board for approval. So it's split between the personnel policy, and that identifies insurance and retirement benefits that the town of Camden offers to employees, as well as the collective bargaining agreement for the police department, which kind of spells out insurance and retirement benefits for the police department. And that's negotiated on every 3 years through their collective bargaining agreement. And the select board has the authority to review things like the level of employee contributions to health insurance, and also choose the town's insurance carrier. So if you look at sort of the impact on the municipal budget and its cost in dollars, so health insurance in our budget, if you look at just the expenditure side, It's about a $9.6 million budget. And when you sort of less out the non-tax-based revenues, we're about $6 million total. So, you know, of the 9.6 million in expenses, about 1 million of that is health insurance. You know, 322,000 is retirement, and then wages account for about 3.5 million of our expenses. So when it comes to health insurance, we offer, our provider is Maine Municipal Employee Health Trust. And there are 3 different plans that they offer that we allow our employees to choose from. So, and it's a little bit different depending on how much longevity an employee has. So full-time eligible employees who are hired before 2007, they receive 100% employer contribution towards both them and their dependents for whichever plan they choose. So anybody who is hired after 2007, they receive 100% of their coverage by the town, and then 80% for their dependents. And it changes a little bit depending on the plan that you choose. Like some of the more expensive plans, or some of the cheaper plans, the town will contribute more towards to incentivize the choice of a cheaper plan. And part-time employees, they can receive health insurance coverage through the town, but they're responsible for paying 100% of their premium costs. So the town provides group life insurance at no cost, and that's all through the health insurance carrier. So we offer 2 choices in terms of retirement. So the Maine Public Employee Retirement System. So if a town employee goes on to that, they contribute 8% and the town contributes 9.6%. And this can be changed annually. Or they can choose ICMA, so that's the International City Management Association. That's a deferred compensation plan. So 5% payroll deduction is required with a match of 5% of yearly gross wage. So the majority of town employees they choose the Maine Public Employee Retirement System. So we also offer vision, dental, income protection, and supplemental insurances. However, 100% of the cost of those premiums are paid by the employees. So of the 3 plans that the town offers for health insurance, there's, you know, these are the names of them. So the majority of employees choose the point of service plan, and it provides the highest level of coverage. It's also the highest cost. But if you sort of look at all the different plans, it's the most predictable in terms of its year-to-year cost because its rates are pretty flat. There's been a lot of adjusting of some of the lower cost plans over the years, so they can be a lot more unpredictable in terms of how much they're going to cost us on a year-to-year basis. So most municipalities in Maine go through the health trust. So it's a self-funded trust, and it's the benefit in doing that is that, you know, we're pooled with all of these other participating employer groups throughout the state. So, you know, 450 municipalities throughout the state of Maine. Municipalities are quasi-municipal entities, so that it just reduces sort of the town's, you know, liability on a year-to-year basis to be pooled in with that many more people, as opposed to if the town of Camden with our, you know, 60 full-time employees were to, you know, seek insurance and be our own pool. So it just really sort of maintains a lot of stability around the cost, and we're able to sort of absorb things like, you know, somebody gets really sick and there's, you know, the high amount of claims paid. It's much better when it's sort of blended into that larger pool of people than if we were to do it on our own. So, you know, it's a self-funding trust. So it sort of, you know, works with a third party on claims. It has all financial responsibility for itself, and it purchases its own reinsurance. So the board works with an actuarial to set rates, and they review past 24 months of claims to figure out their future costs. And, that's kind of the process they go about in setting premiums. The board is pretty open. Both Jody Hansen and I have talked about applying to be on the Health Trust Board in the upcoming years, just because it's good to understand how it works and understand what the impact's going to be on our employer. So these are a little bit old, but it just sort of gives you an idea of how the rates have changed over, some of the past years. I can get you more up-to-date information. I just wasn't able to get it at the time that I did this PowerPoint. But, as you can see, it's really the lower cost plans where there's sort of more volatility on a year-to-year basis versus the comprehensive point of service plan, which the majority of town employees use. So, like I said, the benefit of the health trust is, there's sort of predictable year-to-year, increases or expenses related to health insurance, which isn't always the case with, other municipalities who sort of go outside of the health trust and go to the market or a broker. So I got these examples back in 2017, 2018 of, some of these are all a county, a municipality, and a quasi-municipal group that went back to the health trust after they just got really high premium increases because they were sort of their own risk pool. So like I said, it's beneficial for us to be part of the health trust because our risk is pooled with many, many other municipalities across the state. And, our rate increases on a year-to-year basis, particularly for the plan that most employees utilize, they almost never exceed 10%. So, that's been, very beneficial for planning and budgeting purposes. And I think, all in all, I like to talk about employee benefits because like I said, you'll see them all the time as you're reviewing the budget. Benefits have been a really important tool for me in being able to sort of attract and retain really good employees. So that's, having a good health insurance that we can offer people has been just so important to, being able to get some of the great staff that we have or keep some of the really great staff that we have. Even despite the pandemic, we're still experiencing a labor shortage. We still have a hard time in recruiting certain jobs. If you look at the Parks Department, the Public Works Department, wastewater, there's a lot of competition with the construction industry and private sector employers for these employees. So, it's been one of the sort of biggest things we've been able to offer are really great benefits. And it's kept us competitive to a point. There's still, we've had to adjust wages, but it has been incredibly helpful. And it's also been, really helpful in giving the town a reputation as a really great employer. And, that's something that, I'm certainly proud of. And I think that, all the residents are as well. So, that's just my little spiel on benefits. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a quick question. Is there a requirement or anything in terms of getting over a certain number of years, like competitive bids or anything in terms of, rechecking the costs and what changing those plans would be? I didn't know if there's like a baseline of it has to be reviewed or formally bid out for a different offering or.
Yeah, there's no formal process. Jody and I, though, when we started back in 2017, we went through that exercise of, speaking with insurance brokers. I spoke with other municipalities who had switched, and they were able to offer, some of the brokers were able to offer health insurance that were, the plans were of course lower cost, but it sort of put more like, higher premiums, higher co-pays. There was Belfast, I think, switched from the Health Trust to, I think it was Sigma. I don't remember who it was, but the first year it was great. The costs were really low. And then I think it only took like 1 year of somebody getting sick amongst their staff and their premiums just skyrocketed by like, 20% or something like that. So, when Jody and I kind of looked at everything, it just seemed like it was too risky, that any sort of short-term savings would have a huge impact on employees, a huge negative impact on them. And then it wasn't even guaranteed that it would save the town money into the future because of, the risk of being in such a small pool versus the health trust. So no formal process for looking at it, but we did look at it a few years ago, and that was kind of our concern with switching.
Got it. No, that's helpful. Thanks.
Anyone else? It doesn't have to be just about benefits. It could be about anything that we talked about or any questions that you have to sort of, get more information to prepare yourselves for the upcoming weeks. Do you have anything, Robin?
No, I just think you've covered everything we talked about the other day.
Great. All right, like I offered before, if there are any questions as you're sort of, doing your own review to get prepared and you'd like to speak to Jody or I or Janice, we're more than happy to do whatever we can to help out and get you information. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
That was a lot of information tonight. It gets easier as we get going into it for those of you who haven't done it before.
Oh, and another thing to mention, since we're all on Zoom, we wanted to try to make it a little bit more, just, it's kind of, I know it's hard when you're kind of sitting on Zoom and you're looking at all the squares. So all of the departments will be doing PowerPoint presentations, and they'll be kind of doing an overview of their department and sort of going through, who their staff are, what they do, what the department does, what's different from, this year to last year. Is there anything notable that happened in FY21? Just to try to, make it a little bit more engaging and interesting for all of you, because it's just as much about kind of understanding how all the different functions of the town work and fit together and what that means in terms of the, the budgetary requests. So that's what we're going to try to do to make it a little bit more engaging in the Zoom format. But at the end of the day, I know that we're talking about a budget, so we can only be so exciting.
I think that'll be a big help, Audra. For those of you who haven't been on for a few years ago, we tried to do tours of the different departments over the course of the winter leading up to the budget committee. And it was really difficult to get everybody there. I know the few that I went on, we had about 4 people on them, which left the budget committee not knowing that much more than what we might have known without those tours. And the tour of the sewage treatment plant was so cold. It was one of those horrible, horrible nights, and we were outside. But I think this will be a big help for the committee.
I have one question. Last year at the budget committee, I think the second most topic we talked about was the impact of climate change and how we could rebuild our infrastructure, not to the previous standards, but so that they would be adapted to the sea rise issues we're facing in the harbor, with Alison McKellar always posting those pictures, showing us underwater. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be helpful also to have an understanding of what the select board, what are the strategic priorities of the select board and the town as a the citizens of Camden are governing this town, and make sure that in the budget we're aware of them, especially because we talk a lot about infrastructure in this budget. So it would be, and we were talking about a grant last year to help us rebuild it. Things like that would be, for me, would be helpful to understand more in the context of where Camden wants to go, and how does the work we do at the budget committee help the town achieve those objectives. So I have a bit more of a municipal context, I guess. That would be helpful.
No, that's great input, Sophie. I'll put that together, for the next presentation that we have, because that's probably a good place to talk about some of the more broad goals that the town has and the select board set forth.
I always think it might be nice to kind of have context in, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have context in terms of how our town lines up in terms of debt with other typical towns in Maine or New England.
Absolutely. Sorry, Lord, I'm going to write it down because that's a really good one.
I think, Audra, as you look at goals too, some of the things, I know there are some initiatives going on that are regional, that may be seeing how we fit in, because it's really easy to hyper focus on our town and not see how we fit into the regional picture as well. And I know there are a few things out there that we're working with Rockport, and there's things like that that are coming up.
Absolutely. Anything else like that? Because that's all really good feedback, because sometimes it can be easy to miss some of that stuff that's most important.
I also, I don't know if how the tannery plays in, what we're looking at with if we're responsible for the riverbank cleanup and what that broad picture is.
That's a great one too.
One other thing, I wasn't sure also how much of the things that are budgeted are also tied into supplemental budgets from from Hope, Lincolnville, and other towns. If there's, if that is part of the review of what, bigger projects or initiatives also have ties into, the different towns and the interrelationship of that.
Mm-hmm. So pointing out stuff that might be like a regional expense or something that we share with our neighbors.
Yeah. It's just how it kind of breaks down and feeds into the different groups. So it'd be interesting to see how that overlays in the budget, and also how that gets allocated. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. It would be easy for me to go past a lot of that stuff without kind of pointing out that our contribution is like a 4-town system or whatever the case may be. Sorry, I'm just taking notes while you're all giving me suggestions, which are great. So Robin, did you have anything else?
No, I think that sounds like it. I told Janice I would send her just some introductory things too for people who weren't here tonight. And maybe you can share the slideshow too with the people who weren't.
Oh yes. So what I'm planning on doing, if you go to the website under the news feed, I'll create like an FY22 budget information center, and I'll post all of our all the PowerPoints, as well as you know, the budget itself, any other backup documents. I'll have this recording, a link to it on the YouTube channel. So all that information will sit in that one area. And when that's all created, I'll send out a link to all of you so that if there's anything that, you know, if you have to miss a meeting or whatever happens, you'll be able to go and find anything that you missed.
Good, thank you. So do we need a motion to adjourn? Is that what we're looking for at this point? And then to re-adjourn or to get together again next week and start hitting the numbers? Would anybody like to move for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Good. Well, thank you. I guess we will see everybody next week and start in on the budget.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.